Well, good morning. I would encourage you to take your Bibles and open with me to Romans 13. We're going to look at verses 8 through 10 this morning. You'll find that on page 948 if you're using one of the Bibles from the chair in front of you. And I would also just like to say Happy Mother's Day to all of our moms, our grandmothers, our mothers who mother children who are not biologically their own. We just love you so very much. We thank God for you. I'm thankful my mom's having a wonderful day today. She's with the Lord, and I know that that's a true statement, but thankful for my wife, my daughter, my daughter-in-law, and just a wonderful ministry they have in the lives of our children and grandchildren. But it is fitting, I will say it that way, it's fitting that we're looking at the text that we're looking at this morning on Mother's Day, because this morning we're going to talk about love, and love really is the highest Christian ethic that we have. But before we look at what the Apostle Paul has to say about the issue of love, I want to look at what one of the greatest theologians of the last century had to say about it, Mr. John Lennon. We laugh at that perhaps, but the reality is we are all theologians, right? The question becomes, are we good theologians or not? But every single human being has a concept of God that makes them a theologian, and John Lennon, arguably one of the most influential people of the last century when you think about the impact he had, at least on popular culture. But in 1967, he wrote what would become the global anthem of the flower power movement, and the name of the song was All You Need Is Love. Now, let me read some of the lines from this song. It begins this way: love, 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 love. I didn't even need to read the words for that, but 9 times. And then he says this: love, there's nothing you can do that can't be done. Love, nothing you can sing that can't be sung. Love, nothing you can say, but you can learn how to play the game. It's easy. Love, nothing you can make that can't be made. Love, no one you can save that can't be saved. Love, nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be you in time. It's easy. Now, I read that and I think none of that made sense, right? Not a word of that made sense. I would say it's drivel amounting to nothing, and yet it was the number one song both in the UK, here in the United States, and in many other countries around the world in 1967. I mean, again, think of it. It says, there's nothing you can do that can't be done. Well, as soon as you do it, you prove that it can be done. Notice how he ends. Let me just read the last 12 lines of the song. Oh, love is all you need, oh. Love is all you need, love is all you need, oh yeah. Love is all you need, she loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's classic Beatles, right? She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. Love is all you need, love is all you need, woohoo. Love is all you need, woohoo. Love is all you need, oh yesterday. I don't even know what that means. But then he ends with this: love is all you need, love is all you need. Now, Lennon would go on to say in an interview, talking about this song and its cultural impact, he would go on to say this: the message is love. Well, thanks for clarifying. He said this: I hope everyone in the whole wide world manages to get it. And in this one song, Lennon uses the word love 84 times and manages to say nothing actually about the subject of love except this: it's all you need. Now, I will say this: he's exactly right. But I don't think he knew why he was right, and I don't think he knew just how right he really was. Notice the text, Romans 13, verses 8 through 10. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. Now, having read the text, I feel like I can echo Lenin's words, the message is love, and I hope everyone in the whole wide world gets it. The difference between Paul and Lenin is I think Paul is far more succinct, but also far more clarifying, compelling, and convincing than anything popular culture has ever had to offer on the subject of love. So notice verse 8 again as we walk through these 3 verses. Paul begins this way, "Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law." It's interesting that Paul begins with this idea of indebtedness. It's something that for you and I as average Americans, we know a little something about. Consider these statistics. The average American carries nearly $6,500 in credit card debt from month to month. Now, just FYI, if that's you and you're carrying credit card debt and you take the full term to pay it off just making minimum payments, it's a mortgage pay. It takes you 30 years to pay that off. The average new car payment in America is $742 a month. The average used car payment in America is $525 per month. And the average monthly mortgage payment, now this is average across the United States, but the average monthly mortgage payment, $2,200 a month. The average American has consumer debt upwards of $110,000, right? That's every American. $110,000 in consumer debt. Somewhere around $34 trillion we just owe to other institutions here in the United States. So we understand a little bit of something about indebtedness and especially about financial debt, but I don't think that money's Paul's primary focus here when he says, "Owe no man anything." And I draw that conclusion from what he's going to go on to say in verses 9 and 10 that we've already read together this morning. I think what Paul is talking about, based on what he's going to say in verses 9 and 10, is the debt that we incur, listen now, when we sin against one another. The debt that we incur when we sin against one another. I need you to think with me about this. Both love and sin can only be defined in relationship to God. The scriptures say that God is love, so he himself is the definition of love, and the more we know about him, the more we learn and know about love, right? The more we experience God, the more we experience love, the greater definition we get again around love. The Bible also says that God is righteous. And anything that deviates from God's righteousness is by definition sin. So these two issues are not unrelated to one another. They're actually intimately connected to one another. That is love and sin, but they can only be rightly understood in relationship to God. God has instituted a set of moral requirements or laws to govern human relationships. And he didn't give us these laws that are meant to govern how we relate to him and how we relate to one another because he's just against us having fun. He instituted these laws to keep us from hurting ourselves and from hurting other people. When you look at verses 9 and 10, I think it becomes very clear that one of the purposes of the law, not the entirety of the law, but one of the main purposes of the law is to protect other people from us. You need to appreciate that. These guidelines that God instituted to govern human behavior are there because of the reality of sin and what sin does in the human heart and how it twists us up. And people need to be protected from us and our own desires. That's necessary because we're sinners who sin. We sin out of our very nature. We rebel against God and we use, abuse, and hurt people to get what we want. Why? Because sin by its very nature turns everything inward. The biggest lie baked into every single sin is the false belief that we can be like God without God. We can become like God and we don't need God to do it. We can become our own God. We can do what we want, when we want, how we want, and we are answerable to no one. So everything becomes about me and what I want. And when you start to think that way, you begin to see people in a certain way. Everybody becomes a vehicle or an obstacle. I use you to get what I want, but if I can't use you to get what I want because you're hindering me from getting what I want, then I just blow you up and get you out of the way. But we don't see people as image bearers of God. We see them as tools or as obstacles. Can I use you, or do I need to blow you up? That's what sin does in human relationships. In fact, it so twists things up that we actually get this definition of love that says love is an unquestioned yes. Love is an unqualified yes. If you love me, you want me to be happy, and this makes me happy, so give me what makes me happy. And if you don't give me what I want, then you don't love me. But that sin creates a real legal debt, and that legal debt has to be paid. And we often talk about that debt that we incur between us and God, and we talk about it in terms of the gospel, but that debt exists every time that we sin against one another. We increase it, even in our relationships, and you know this. You don't have to be told this. If someone were to break into your house and steal your stuff and assault you, would you just be okay with that? Would you just be, oh, that's no big deal? Would you just go on about your life, or would you seek justice? Well, you absolutely would seek justice. Why? Because they have broken the law. Not only they've broken your law. That has incurred an actual debt between you and that person, and that's got to be satisfied. And there's something in the human condition that's not going to allow us to move forward until we get that sense of justice satisfied. I mean, we'll fight for that. If someone you're in relationship with just hurts you, betrays you, gossip about you, lies to you, or lies about you, are you just good with that? You're just willing to let that go and just let bygones be bygones and pretend that there's not a problem? You can just go on living in relationship with that person even though you know there's this thing in between the two of you, and even any semblance of normalcy has to be done around this thing? Of course not. Why? Because that sin has created a real legal debt between you and that other person. And you can't pretend like everything's cool until that's taken out of the way. It's always there. We all know it because we're all image bearers of God, and He's built it into the human condition. He's offended by sin. We are offended by sin. He gets angry over sin. We get angry over sin. He demands justice in the face of sin. We demand justice in the face of sin because we have been made in His image and likeness. So the command that Paul gives us is to live in such a way that you're free from this moral indebtedness. And the only way to do that is love. Loving others and protecting them from you. But what does he mean when he says that? We talk about this issue of love a lot. We've talked about it even in the book of Romans many times already. This is message number 60. We've got about 14 more before we're all done by the time we get to the end of November. We've talked about this issue of love multiple times. And we have to talk about it multiple times. It's one of these things we have to come back to over and over and over again because love gets so twisted by sin that if we're not constantly reminded of what it really is, we pervert it and we make it what we want it to be. The word love by itself in our culture doesn't describe very much. And I've made all kinds of jokes about it over the years about if I can say I love my wife and I love bacon at the same time, then the word love doesn't mean very much, right? How can both of those things describe the same thing? They can't. But Paul had a huge advantage over us because in his culture, in the Greek language, it was very specific in terms of the words that you could choose from to describe the kind of love that you're talking about. Whether it was friendship kind of love or romantic kind of love or the kind of love that he's talking about here, which is the highest and most noble kind of love, which we know is agape love. I have my definition for it on the screen. This is a composite definition drawn from a lot of people, but agape love is a verb, therefore it always requires action. Agape love is not just an intentional love, meaning you just have good intentions to do something, but it actually never comes to fruition. Oh, I meant to do that. Agape is a verb. It requires you to actually do something. It's selfless, it's sacrificial, it's volitional, meaning it's not strictly emotional. It's not about whether you have emotional connections of love for that person or you feel good about what you're doing. It's you're choosing to do the thing that you're doing. You're making a choice. It gives to those who don't deserve it and who can't repay it, and it always takes the initiative. Love demands that you move first, and it always seeks God's best for the one that you love. And I have put this definition in front of you over and over and over. And I will say this morning. You won't see love clearly until you're willing to see sin clearly. If we don't see sin for what it really is, how can we recognize and value and see the love of God for what it really is? So the cross gives us the clearest picture of what this kind of love really is, what it does, what it costs, what it requires. Think with me, there was nothing outside of Jesus himself that compelled him to go to the cross. You didn't make him do that. The angels didn't make him do that. There was no rule outside of himself that compelled him to do that. Nobody twisted his arm around his back and made him do that. He laid his life down of his own accord. Why? Because he was driven and motivated by love, because he is essentially, intrinsically, and unchangeably love. God is love. Jesus is God in all ways that God is God. Therefore, he is love. And he chose to do it for you when you were his enemy. It doesn't mean that he had butterfly feelings in his stomach, that kind of thing that we normally associate with these feelings of love. It doesn't mean that that's the way he felt for you when he went to the cross. He chose to do it as an intentional act of his will, to put you ahead of himself. He chose to lay down his very life, to die in your place as a substitute to pay your debt when you didn't deserve it, because we were living hostile in mind and deed when Jesus died for us. We were his enemies. We hated him. Every one of us, Paul has already told us, wanted to go astray. We wanted to be our own God. We wanted to do what we wanted to do, and we hated anything that looked like restraint. But he chose, as an act of his will, to lay his life down to the fullest in your place on your cross to pay your debt when you didn't deserve it, and with 1,000 lifetimes you could never repay it. With an eternity in hell you could never repay it. With all the words that you could muster, using all the languages of the world, you could never say thank you enough. You could never earn what he has given to you. So we owed God a moral debt that Jesus paid by love through the shedding of his blood. And now the command that Paul gives us is to love others in that same way. Since you have received love and been the object of love, now you're to love others that same way. Notice what he says in verse 9. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Paul is quoting from Leviticus 19:18. It's also the second half of what we've come to know as the Great Commandments. I'm going to show you my favorite version. It shows up in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but I like Mark's version the best because it's just the fullest in the sense of how he describes Jesus saying we're supposed to love God. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he, Jesus, answered them well, asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? This was a very frequent topic of debate among the scribes and Pharisees. The scribes were experts in the Old Testament law, and so they would have known the 613 Old Testament commandments inside and out. They were often called lawyers because these would have been the people that folks would have come to when they had a relational dispute or a legal dispute, and they needed needed someone to settle this for them, they would go to the lawyers and they would say, what does the law say about this? And then they would think about these 613 commandments and they would come up with their verdict. And so they would debate this kind of thing often, and they're bringing it to Jesus to try to trip him up in a trap so that they might have something to accuse him of. But verse 29, Jesus gives his answer. The most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. He's beginning his answer from the Shema. This is taken from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5. This is very familiar to the Jews of his day and to ours, because Orthodox Jews still quote the Shema 2 times a day, in the morning and in the evening. And it begins with these words, hear, O Israel. Hear, that's the word Shema in Hebrew. Listen with the intent of obeying. This isn't casual. This is purposeful. This is active. You're not just hearing, but you're listening. Israel, the covenant people of God, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And so how should we respond to that great theological statement? And you shall love. Jesus uses the word agape. You shall agape the Lord your God with all your heart. That center of who you are. The writer of Proverbs would say in chapter 4, verse 23, guard your heart with all diligence, with all your effort, because out of it flows all the issues of life. Everything you've ever thought, everything you've ever said, everything you've ever desired has flowed out of your heart. And with all your soul. Your soul is that part of the immaterial person who is connected to this existence. You might think of the spirit as that part of you that's connected to heaven. Your soul is that part of you that's connected to this existence and to this earth, right? And so your soul is where your identity is. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane talked about being burdened, being weary in his soul, right? It's where your emotions come from. And then with your mind, that rational, intellectual part of who you are, and then with all your strength, that's your physical vigor, your body, your members, your physical body. So the first commandment is love God with everything that you are and everything that you have, inside and out, every part of you without exception. All your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. And the second flows out of the first. The second isn't just related to the first, it flows out of the first. It's a result of the first. I would contend you can't do the second if you haven't done the first. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. I would have you notice, though, that as Jesus talks about this, the law talks about this, Paul talks about this, it isn't just a command to love others. It's not just a command to love your neighbor. It's harder than that. It's love your neighbor as yourself. It's axiomatic, meaning it goes without saying. You love you. Now, it might be possible for someone here this morning to have a low opinion of yourself. It might be possible that you don't like yourself. There might even be things about yourself that you would say that you hate, but it is true nonetheless that you love you. I love me. How do I know? Because I guarantee you all slept inside last night. You all took a shower. We all say thank you for doing that. You put on clothes. Again, thank you for doing that. And you didn't put on your worst. You ate food, and you didn't just eat bread and water, which is all that's necessary perhaps to sustain life, but you actually eat food that you enjoy, in flavor combinations that you enjoy. Why do you do that? Because you love you. I had a physical not too long ago, and I got my blood work back, and it showed that my cholesterol was just a little high. And so, my doctor wants me to go on cholesterol medication. I said, no, not right now. I'm going to work on it with other ways. And then I get this long email that comes through the app. It's just a standard form thing that they send out to anybody who has, higher than desired cholesterol levels. And it's talking of like this. It says, you got to abstain from fatty foods. You got to abstain from red meat. You got to eat more leafy green vegetables. And I'm reading this to Michelle, and I'm thinking, this guy is crazy. He doesn't know me at all. Well, why would I think that? Because I love me, and me loves bacon, and so me gonna eat bacon, right? Regardless of my cholesterol level. It's just true. You love you. I love me. So when the Bible says to love your neighbor as yourself, I've shared this with you before, but it has the idea of taking the skin that's on your body and wrapping it around the other person in such a way that you feel what they feel, as if it were happening to you, and then do what you would want someone else to do if that thing were really happening to you. It's the idea of entering into another person's circumstances, entering into another person's pain, entering into another person's trial, and trying to do so with a sense of empathy that results in sympathy. You know the difference, right? Empathy comes from shared experience, in that sense of, hey, I've hurt before. I live in skin just like you do. I know that pain hurts. I really feel badly for you because you're in pain. I know what that's like. That's typically the end of empathy. Gee, I feel bad for you. But you've got to have that before you can get to sympathy. Sympathy is empathy in action. Sympathy is, hey, I live in skin just like you do. I know that pain hurts. I've been in hard situations before. Let me help you. See, that's part of the incarnation. Part of why Jesus took on flesh and blood. It wasn't just so that he could cognitively understand the human experience, but it was so that he could enter into it with skin on to feel what life is like when you're living in this. To say, I understand now. Pain hurts. Grief hurts. Being lied about hurts. Being betrayed hurts. Being mistreated hurts. Let me help you. Being tempted is hard. Let me help you. Jesus put on skin because we live in skin, so that he could fully participate in the human experience without sin. So that he could become, the Bible doesn't say our empathetic great high priest, but our sympathetic great high priest, who not only walks with us and says, gee, I feel bad for you because you're going through that hard thing, but walks with us and says, you're going through that hard thing, let me help you. And that's what we're called on to do for one another. Take the skin that's on our body, wrap it around another person, as it were, so that we might feel what they're going through as if it were happening to us. And then do for them what we would want someone to do for us if we were in that exact situation. Notice now verse 10. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. Paul has already talked to us about governing authorities. He's already talked to us about paying taxes and giving honor and all of those things earlier in chapter 13. All to get to this point to say, but those governing authorities are not the answer. You think about the different threads that hold a community together, that hold a culture together, that hold a nation or a people group together. You think about their social norms. You think about their shared celebrations. You think about their traditions that they hold in common. You think about the laws that they have passed that seek to reflect the values that they hold. And you think about the fact that they then have law enforcement, right, to uphold those laws that they've passed that at some level reflect the things that they hold to be important. All of those things matter to a degree, but Paul would get to this point here to say, but none of them are the answer, not individually and not even all together. Because you can pass all the laws that you want. You can have the strongest, most stringent, most heavy-handed government that you can think of, and that's still not enough to constrain the human heart. We are sinners who sin. And all those things, while they might be important to hold a people together, they're not enough to change the human heart and to transform us into something that is altogether different. You can pass all the laws you want. They will not turn sinners into saints. You can turn them into sinners who look like saints until they think they can get away with it. How do I know that? Because that's going to happen to a lot of people in the millennial kingdom when Jesus is living right here on the earth. He's ruling as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. People can actually see him. He's ruling with an iron fist. Sin is dealt with decisively. And there'll be a whole bunch of people who outwardly will conform. They'll look like saints until Satan gives them an opportunity to rebel, and then they'll reveal the fact they were always sinners. That's not what we should want. Not even in our culture, that's not what we should want, is just having the right laws so that sinners actually look like saints. The answer is loving God with everything that you are. And out of that consuming, pervasive, transforming, captivating love for God, you then love your neighbor as yourself. If we could just do that, this is what Paul's saying. If we could just do that, we wouldn't need any other laws. Paul says, love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. I want you to understand, loved ones, that this thing that we call civil society, it actually hangs on a pretty thin thread. And you know what it relies on? Your ability to travel from New York to California, or just to go to Walmart and think that you can park your car, walk into the store, buy what you need with money that actually has value, take it back out to your car, drive home and consume it, and not have to worry about 1,000 things going wrong, like riots and people killing you to take what you have. You know what this largely comes down to? Is that the vast majority of Americans, in our case here, living in America, have agreed to live by a set of largely unwritten rules. And as soon as a majority of people say, I'm no longer going to live by those rules, you don't have civil society anymore. In fact, you have every reason to be very, very scared to leave your home. Let me give you an example of some of these rules. Hey, where do you see these things written down? Respect the line. What do I mean? No butts, no cuts, no coconuts, right? Everybody knows that. You were taught that since you were a little kid in elementary school, but you didn't have to have a rule necessarily hanging on a wall to tell you that. How'd you learn it? Because everybody around you made sure you knew that rule. You don't cut the line. You got to get in the back. The every other rule when merging in a construction zone. That's a rule of civil society, and we don't obey that. Everything breaks down. One of my spiritual gifts is sarcasm, and Michelle will tell you, when we're pulling up to a construction zone where, different lanes are merging into one, and I see that person flying by everybody else just to get to the end, I become very vocal, and I just start to say things like, oh, sure, your time is so much valuable than everybody else's time. Absolutely, you're so important, you should go to the front of the line. Why should you wait like everybody else is waiting? Now, they're already gone by me, so they don't know I'm having a monologue between me and Michelle. No littering. Don't turn your community into a dump. I remember going to Haiti, it's almost 15 years ago now since I went, and there was trash everywhere. And I remember being shocked by just these piles of trash everywhere. And Opal Golden had gone so many times to Haiti before I had gone for the first time, and I thought, wow, this is because of the earthquake. And she said, no, it's always been this way. They just feel like they have a right to put their trash wherever they want. Well, not in our culture. So we see people throwing stuff outside. We get upset by that, right? No littering. It's part of what makes for civil society. Giving up your seat to the elderly, the pregnant, or the handicapped. That's a frustrating thing, I'll tell you that. Be polite. I talked about this last week in terms of using manners, but just be polite with people. Smile at people. Not using the speaker function on your cell phone in public. Can I get an amen for that one? Walking around like everybody wants to hear your conversation. Everybody wants to listen to your music. Walk on the right side of the sidewalk. And listen, if you're in a big group and you're using the whole sidewalk, everybody should kind of move to the right so you don't force somebody coming the other way to have to walk in the street. That's just being polite. That's just part of a civil society. Be on time. It shows that you respect the other person that you have an appointment with, right? That you show up on time. Be there when you say you're going to be there. Waiting for others to exit the elevator before you try to enter. Now, you don't have to worry about this on an escalator, because if you're waiting for someone to get off an escalator, you're trying to get on, one of you is going the wrong way. But in an elevator, you should wait, let them all get off, or a bus, or a subway, or whatever it is, and then you go ahead and get on. And then number 10, put your grocery cart back in the corral when you're done using it. Don't just leave it in the park. Have you ever driven through Walmart and getting ready to pull into a parking spot, and there's a cart sitting right in the middle of the spot? And listen, when we lose these things as a culture, we don't just lose the list. It's evidence that love of neighbor has already left the building. It's evidence that we don't care about the people around us. It's evidence of the fact that we think we're more important than everybody else. It's evidence that we've written ourselves into the center of the story and we're the star and everybody orbits around us. See, it's just a list. But when we lose the list, we're in a far more dangerous place as a community and as a people and as a culture than we might like to admit. But listen, these things are hard. The Lord knew I needed another story in my life. So last night, Michelle and I are driving back from Scranton. We went to our granddaughter, Peyton. She's 4 years old. She had her first ballet recital. That was fun. She was super cute. But watching 8-year-olds dance to It's Raining Men is just awkward on a good day. But anyway, we're driving back from Scranton, after this. It's about 9:30 at night, and we're coming through the construction zone on 86 that's around, Appalachian and that area. And we had the whole stretch to ourselves. There was nobody around us, but we end up catching up to traffic just as the construction zone is coming to an end, and they're going about 35 miles an hour. I said to Michelle, why are we going so slow? So we get out of the construction zone and open back up to 2 lanes, so the car in front of me and myself, we get in the other lane, and we didn't break the speed limit, but we got up to it rather quickly, and we get around the car that was going so slow. And while we were at it, we passed another tractor trailer, but then I got back over into the regular lane, and then the car that was going so slow ended up beside me. So they got on the gas, and they got up beside me in the passing lane, and then they're just riding there, and they're kind of weaving back and forth and coming closer and closer to me. And Michelle says, I think they're going to come over, and I slam on the brakes just in time for them to occupy the space that I was just occupying. Well, I'm upset by that, so I honked the horn. Now, Michelle told the story, she said I punched the steering wheel, and the horn happened to honk. Potatoes. I mean, you can quibble about the details, but my point is this. In that moment, I was not loving my neighbor. And if you're thinking right now, well, they weren't loving you in the way they just completely cut you off, you just missed the whole point of the sermon. If my loving them is predicated on them doing lovable things, then it's not actually loving my neighbor as myself. If my loving them is them doing all the right things, then I'm not loving them the way Christ loved me. And so the takeaway is, if you cut me off in traffic, I am going to preach about you, right? No. The takeaway is this. The takeaway is this. These tests on whether we're going to love our neighbor as ourselves, they can come quickly. They can come unexpectedly. And in that moment, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? Are you going to honk with your horn or with your mouth? Are you going to make gestures? You're going to get angry? Or are you going to choose to show love to those who don't deserve it and who can't or won't or will never repay it? And why would we do that? Because he first loved us. And here's the hardest part for us, loved ones, and with this I'm going to end. This isn't supposed to start out there. It's supposed to start in here with us. What did Jesus say? By this all men will know that you're my disciples, by the fact that you love me? That's not what he said. He said, by this all men will know that you're my disciples, by the love you have for one another. This loving your neighbor as yourself, it has to begin with us. And if we can't even love each other the way we love ourselves, what in the world makes us think we could go outside of here to a hostile world and love them as ourselves? Love your neighbor as yourself. John Lennon said, all you need is love. I agree with him. But he didn't know why he was right. And he didn't know how right he really was. Why is love all you need? Why is love the end of the matter? Because love fulfills the law. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love is the greatest protection in all of your relationships for other people against you and your own sinful inclinations. And why would you do that? Because God demonstrated his own love for you, and that while you were still a sinner, Christ died for you. The gospel is your motivation. He didn't just empathize with your condition. He sympathized with it. And through his own life given on the cross, he paid your debt. And because you are loved, now love your neighbor as yourself. The tests are going to come unexpectedly. They're going to come quickly. They're going to come surprisingly. And what are you going to do? I pray that this would be the training ground. And as we love each other, we would be able to go out of here and love all those that Christ has put into our life. And through that love, they might have a hunger for what has transformed us. And by the way that we love others, we might actually be able to make more and better disciples of Christ. Will you stand with me? We'll pray. Father, we love you, and I pray that we would, out of our love for you, grow to love you with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. I'm sure there are moments in time, even in a place like this, at a time like this, where we have considered the fact that you loved us so much that you gave your only begotten Son, that if we just believe in him, we would not perish but have everlasting life. That we get closer to loving you with all that we are. But I pray that tonight and tomorrow, school and work and being in community and being around other people who have their own agendas and their own idols and their own list of affections and priorities and values, that it gets more difficult. And so I pray that our love for you would be so captivating and consuming that out of that love that has remade us and redefined us, we could actually love our neighbor as ourselves. You have appointments already set up for us in which that's going to be tested. And I pray that when those moments come, we might love. Pray that for those that are just hurting around us right now, and we know it because we live in community with each other, that we wouldn't stop at just empathy and just feeling badly because others are feeling badly. But I pray, Father, that our empathy would turn to sympathy as Jesus's did for us, and that we might do what we can do to help alleviate whatever pain, whatever suffering, whatever trials they're going through to the best of our ability while we all look to you. I pray that as we walk in his steps, we might become more and more sympathetic as we grow in love one for another and for you. And I ask this in Jesus' name.